Before we get started, I just want to clarify that in my mind, there isn't a clear-cut worst team in the NFL. Obviously, to do this video, I have to have an inclination on one team being worse than everybody else, but I don't feel super strongly about who I chose. I think there are a couple teams in contention for the worst, and with that said, the Panthers are my selection for the worst team in the NFL because they just have a deficiency of depth at basically every positional group, and they don't have a ton of star talent to make up for that. With that said, though, there are some bright spots that will also be discussed throughout this video. So with that all said, let's get started. Bryce Young had an awful start to his career as he was tied for 30th out of 35 in expected points added, and tied for 33rd out of 35 in quarterback rating. His supporting cast, which is based on the PFF grades of his receivers and pass blocking, was ranked 33rd, which definitely hurt him. So in all, he ranked as my 33rd best quarterback out of 35. So yeah, he was pretty darn rough as a rookie. But again, it is hard to evaluate just how much of that was him versus the supporting cast because he had just dreadful pass protection, and aside from Adam Thielen, basically no options to throw to. So it's going to be very telling how he does this year because they've upgraded the line tremendously and added a lot of receiving talent as well. At backup quarterback, Andy Dalton is a premier option. He could be a reasonable starter, so he is really good for a backup. He's not going to wow you with his arm talent by any stretch. He's never really had a good arm, and it's only gotten worse with time. And he's also not very mobile, but he can get rid of the ball quickly and is accurate, so those are nice traits to have. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter all that much what the backup situation is because this team isn't going anywhere at the moment, and really Bryce Young is basically the entire selling point for the Panthers at the moment, but it is nice to have a good backup. If worst comes to worst, they could trade him for some assets because, like I said, he is capable of being a starter. Not a high-end one, but a reasonable player. And that has some value because as quarterbacks get injured as the season progresses, Dalton could be somebody that helps the team get to where they're trying to go. So he's a nice asset to have. As I mentioned before, the O-line for Carolina last year was really poor. They were 23rd in pass block win rate, which I think is actually doing them more of a service than they deserved because they were so very rough for much of the year. I think they were probably one of the worst 2 or 3 pass blocking teams in the league. But 23rd isn't good either, so it's not like ESPN stat is saying that they were great. In addition to that, they were 30th in run block win rate, which I think seems about right. They were poor in that regard as well. Compared to last year, they should be much better. They brought in Damian Lewis, who is a solid guard. They also brought in Robert Hunt, who is an elite guard. They replaced Cade Mays, who is an awful pass protector, and Gabe Jackson and others at right guard who were poor pass blockers as well. Their depth is actually pretty good. Cade Mays might be an issue as a starter, but he is really good as a backup because his lack of pass protection can be attacked less because he's just not going to be out there for quite as long and won't be as exposed. Josh Neiman is a good swing tackle too, as he can pass protect and run block at serviceable levels. In all, the offensive line should be a lot better than it was last year. I'm not going to say that it's going to be great, but it actually does have some potential to it because Ikem Ekwonu is somebody that is just on a good developmental track. He is so super athletic and is very physical in the run game. He has very high potential. Taylor Morton is a really solid right tackle as well, and the interior play should be a lot better. Austin Corbett is not a great center, but he has been solid for much of his career, so that's not bad. You could do a lot worse than what they have. And I think it's going to be very helpful for everybody, especially Bryce Young, because the pass protection was just so poor last year. But as the run block win rate would also suggest, the run blocking was also very poor. So it should help open up lanes for the running game, which will make them a little bit less one dimensional as well. Regarding their weapons, they're tremendously improved as well. Deontay Johnson, with really poor quarterback play, was 40th in yards per game and 29th in yards per reception. So he's a really good player. I think we oftentimes make too much of his drops because he has historically had some concentration issues where he can drop balls that really shouldn't be dropped. But as a whole, he is a fantastic receiver. He's one of the best route runners in the entire league, which is just so valuable. It especially is valuable to a young quarterback because it gives them easier reads, because it doesn't have to be a contested catch that gets made. It can be made in space, which is obviously a lot easier to produce for a quarterback. Adam Thielen had a solid year in Carolina too, being 32nd in yards per game and 98th in yards per reception. So he's definitely not going to get deep downfield very much, but he is an effective target nonetheless. Xavier Legette was drafted 32nd overall and was my 48th best player in the draft. So he's a solid addition to the Panthers. Since 2019, the average first round receiver has a 73 PFF grade, which would be good for 39th out of 102 wide receivers. So Legette should be an early contributor if he's going to be anything in the pros. I think that he can be. He obviously wasn't as high in my realm as he was selected in the NFL's eyes, but at the end of the day, I'm going to defer a bit more to what the NFL thinks than what I perceive, because they just have more information. But it is something to have as a guideline nonetheless. He might not be as good as the average first round selected receiver is, and that is also evident by the fact he was taken 32nd overall. So he might not be quite as good as the average one is, but the average receiver that gets taken in the first round is really good. So that's a good baseline to have. Tommy Tremble and Jatavion Sanders will be splitting snaps at tight end, with Sanders being drafted in the 4th this year, but being regarded as a second rounder by a lot of people. Since 2019, too, the average 4th round rookie tight end averages a 66 PFF grade, which would be good for 20th out of 46 tight ends. So again, that's actually pretty good. You're not going to have the highest hopes for a 4th round tight end, but in general, they've actually produced pretty well at the NFL level early on in their careers. So there is hope that Sanders will be a contributor early on. Moving forward, Chuba Hubbard is an awesome name and is a solid running back, as he was 16 out of 59 running backs in PFF grade. He's a great runner and a decent receiver too, so he's a solid contributor. Depth-wise, Jonathan Brooks was drafted in the 2nd and is a very solid running back too. Jonathan Mingo had an awful rookie year at receiver, but still has potential as a former 2nd rounder that was drafted with good athleticism as a 6'2", 4'4", 40 type of player. So there is potential there. And if he can get going, that would be huge, because that would give the Panthers 3 legitimate receivers, and they would all fit in very nicely with each other, with Deontay Johnson being that true outside receiver, Mingo being also an outside option, and Thielen being the slot receiver. So they would just fit in perfectly with each other. They'd all have differing skill sets. And in addition to that, you also have Legette. He also should be on the outside. So that would give them a ton of versatility and overall a fair amount of talent as well. At cornerback, the Panthers are actually pretty good. JC Horn ranked 29th out of 118 corners in PFF grade in 2022 when he last played most of the year. So he can be elite when healthy. He is uber physical and was a top 10 pick for a reason. So he is somebody to watch out for if he can stay healthy. Dane Jackson was graded 71 out of 127 cornerbacks by PFF. He's much better than that would suggest, though, as he was 120th out of 121 corners in run defense and 42nd in coverage. So he is a nice cover guy. He just can't defend the run to save his life, which is probably due to the fact he's a bit undersized for the position. And Troy Hill was ranked 77th out of 127 corners. Like Jackson, Hill was better in coverage than that ranking would suggest, as he was 52nd in that regard, which is really solid. So their guys can cover. They just, aside from Horn, can't really defend the run, which, if you're going to be good at one or the other, it's obviously favorable to be better in coverage. At safety, they are really well set. Xavier Woods ranked 12th out of 95 safeties in PFF grade. He is great in coverage and against the run, so he is a very nice piece. He can also play in the box or deep, so he's a versatile piece as well. Jordan Fuller was graded 48th out of 95 safeties according to PFF, so he's about dead average. He is stronger against the run than the pass, but he is solid in both regards, so he's not really an issue in any regard. Regarding their defensive back depth, they are really lacking there, so they need to stay healthy if they want to compete in coverage. On the D-line, Carolina is surprisingly good. Jadeveon Clowney finished 11th out of 122 in edge pressures. He is also a really good run defender as well, so he has no deficiencies in his game. He really has taken his pass rushing abilities up a notch as he's gotten older, which you don't oftentimes see, but he has become much more refined with time. DJ Wanham ranked tied for 56th out of 122 for edge pressures despite missing 2 games. Like Clowney, he's also very solid against the run, so that's nice to have. 56th out of 122 might not sound the most impressive, but again, missing 2 games, he could have been a bit higher. Derek Brown was 28th out of 142 in defensive interior pressures, but that doesn't really tell the story as he is an absolute beast against the run. If he isn't the best against it, he's in the top 3 at least for run defending players in the NFL, so he is an absolute monster. He's really solid as a pass rusher, as evident by that 28th ranking, but man, he can just blow up runs and shoot gaps at a super high level. So he is really, really talented. Ashawn Robinson is a big step down, being 101 out of 142 for defensive interior pressures, but he is all right as a run defender, so he's not completely devoid of use. As for their depth on the defensive line, Nick Thurman is another good run defender on the interior. That's about all they have, though. So again, they really need to stay healthy because they just don't have depth. And that is kind of a reoccurring theme for this team and is why I mentioned them as being an incomplete team, because they just don't have any insulation from injuries. Surprisingly enough, the linebacker core for the Panthers is really solid. Shaq Thompson ranked 24th out of 81 linebackers in PFF grade in 2022 when he was last healthy. He's super good against the run and can struggle against the pass a little bit, but also be good. It really varies. Year to year, he's been up and down, and obviously then game to game too. As you could imagine, he's been up and down. It really, I don't know. It depends on the game. It depends on just how he's feeling, I guess, if he's going to be good or not in coverage. Josie Jewell was 40th out of 82 linebackers in PFF grade. He's all right against the run, really good as a pass rusher, and solid in coverage. So he meshes nicely with Thompson. He kind of fills out the deficiencies of Thompson and vice versa. Their depth at linebacker is Trayvon Wallace, who they drafted in the third. Since 2019, the average third round rookie linebacker has a 51 PFF grade, which is pretty rough, as that would be good for 83 out of 89 linebackers that played 20% or more of snaps. So he might not be a good contributor this year, but he's someone to watch out for down the road, as he could turn into a contributor. In all, Carolina has about as big of a range in wins as anyone in the league. Bryce Young really struggled year one, but his supporting cast was about as bad as anybody's. This year, the O-line is much improved with very talented additions on the interior, and hopefully further improvement by Ikem Ekwonu, who gets another year of development. Weapons-wise, Deontay Johnson was a massive addition, as he can actually separate, which wasn't the case for any skill position player aside from Adam Thielen. And Xavier Legette is a talented wide receiver as well. Defensively, their cornerbacks are a bit top-heavy, but solid overall. Their safeties are really good, too. On the D-line, they have legitimate star power with Derek Brown being an elite interior player, and Jadeveon Clowney being a very good edge rusher. Linebacker-wise, they are talented and balance each other's skill sets well, so there's some things to like.